So I'm going to welcome you formally to this conversation, David, and I'm going to start by asking you to introduce yourself in terms of what you do and what you care about, and maybe why you said yes to this conversation today.
Oh, sure. I love that. I love that positioning. So I have been in the learning and development field for about 25 years. Like a lot of people in this field, I came into it accidentally. I started my career in banking, and I was good at my job. And people at the bank noticed that I was good at my job. I said, "You're really good at it. Go show other people how to do that." And discovered that I loved training and development, loved helping people, and kind of stopped at that point being a banker and started my journey as an L&D professional, and have never looked back. What has shaped my career a lot, I spent the first 12, kind of get the quick resume points out of the way, spent the first 12 years in what I would define as corporate L&D, working in finance, nonprofit, a couple of other areas. And then about 12 years ago, I had the opportunity to join an organization called the Learning Guild, which was a professional development community, which worked really well for me. As much as it was a bit of a leap of faith, it was a shift in my career. It resonated with, to your question of kind of what drives me, what I'm interested in. I've always been very interested in the intersection of learning and technology. It's a passion space of mine, kind of looking at how technology can help us learn, help us build performance improvement solutions. So I've always had that curiosity around that space. And when the opportunity for the guild came up, it kind of that was my job, is to just exist at that intersection, to build resources and experiences so that people could explore that intersection in a practical way, and have spent a little decade more within that organization. So that's kind of what drives me. And I'm looking at how technology is always giving us opportunities, opening new doors, and in the context of what's going on today, transforming the organizations we work for. So that's kind of what drives the work that I do to this day.
Perfect. Okay. Which makes you a wonderful person for me to talk to in terms of where learning and development is going, because as a 25-year plus instructional designer, I am, for the first time, really kind of unsure of my footing right now because things are changing so fast,
Sure.
that I thought for a little while I'd be able to outrun the changes, and now I'm realizing I'm not going to, because the change is exponential to the exponential to the exponential. And so I've become really interested in what are some of the key areas of knowledge and skills and attitudes that people need today to be successful in the workplace. So if I'm looking to help people develop, what am I looking to help people develop in so they can be successful, at least over the next few years, as much as we can anticipate what's coming?
Sure. So, a couple of thoughts. What when we put the lens out at the people that we support, it becomes very contextual. I mean, I mentioned in my intro, like I worked for. I mean, I'll give you two extremes. I worked for a bank that was all about the bottom line. No offense to the bank, but that's what it was. And how we can make more money and serve our clients to do that. And I worked for a nonprofit that supported individuals with developmental disabilities, and the what those people need in those for those two different worlds, very very different, very very different. So the context of how what we need to develop, what people need to learn, is going to be very contextual to the organization that you work for. That said, I think that there are some broad strokes that apply to many organizations. And if I'm as an L&D professional and I'm building resources that kind of explore this today, um, I hate talking in buzzwords, because I find a buzzword is a term whose usage has spread faster than its understanding, and it loses meaning when that happens. So the word that's coming into my head is disruption, because we are in a very disruptive time right now. And it's one of those words that I feel has been diluted because everything is disruptive. Um, but I do think that the nature of work in and of itself is changing, and we have to be very mindful. I think right now, like, you look at the future of work, and obviously AI is a big part of that. But I think AI is while it's the biggest rock in the room, AI is one of many drivers of change to the future of work. And I think as learning and development professionals, we tend to look inward. If you look at the AI discussion as an example, a lot of the discussion in L&D around AI is how is it going to change the work that we do? How are we going to leverage these tools? Is my work as an instructional designer at risk if all of these tools could create content so easily? And those are all valid questions. I don't mean to minimize those questions. But I think to your question of what the people that we support, we need to flip that lens. And instead of just looking inwardly, I mean, if you think of about what our job as learning professionals is at its core, it's supporting people. It's supporting people to do their jobs, to learn and to develop skills. And if the nature of what it means for the people we support to do their jobs is changing, then by definition, our role needs to evolve to adapt to those changes as well. So that to me is the biggest issue is how is the work that in an organization, the work wherever you work today, how is the work of the people that you support changing? It is changing right now. I mean, in most organizations, work is going to look different in 5 years than it looks today. It's going to look different 3 years, depending on the organization that you're at. I'm not an absolute person who's going to be like, oh my God, everything's going to be turned on its head. It's very contextual. Some organizations are going to change faster and more. Some organizations are going to change less and slower. But change is probably going to be happening, and we need to be tapped into that. We need to understand what's going on and say, okay, so if this person who I support or this department that I support, their work is changing in this manner, how does my work change? How does the work that I need to do? Because it's not just a matter of updating the course to reflect the new reality of the people. It might need to be updating our methodologies to match what the work of people is doing. And I think that that's a lens that we don't often enough look at our work through in L&D, especially through the lens of emerging technologies.
Thank you for explaining that so well, because I think that that is intended to be the driving force behind these conversations, and even I slip into the, "So what does that mean for me as an instructional designer?" And really it's supposed to be about how can I, as an instructional designer, support employees in their changing worlds of work, which can be quite specific to the context, like you said, but there do seem to be some general trends. One of the things that I've seen is, and I'm not sure people are always clear about making this distinction when they're talking about it, but I see it change from a focus on learning and sort of content-driven learning to performance support. So that people will be using tools to help them do their work, and so how much they need to know about how to do their work, and how much are we and the business providing tools to support them in the doing of their work.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I
Right.
think it speaks to two things that I see in the field. One is it's a hurdle I think we've
Mhm.
always struggled with. As long as I've been in this field, we've struggled with it. Is a new tool emerges, and we kind of look at it in a binary way, as if like this tool emerged, so we no longer need this tool. And it's not learning or performance support; it's learning and performance support. It's another slice that gets added to our tool set pie so that we can be more tailored in the solutions that we develop. Sometimes performance support is exactly what we need, and we should look at it through that lens. Other times we need something deeper that gives people more context. So that's the first part. The second part that I would touch on, and I think this is becoming very very important in the context of the AI discussion that we're having, is around critical thinking. I mean, to a certain extent. I mean, there are a lot of tools that are emerging that are enabling us to automate a lot of tasks. A lot of automation is coming, and it should come. But the question becomes is that line drawn in the sand around the critical thinking that's attached to it. I mean, I'll give you a great example or a personal example for myself. I'm doing a lot of work right now that I'm harnessing a lot of the automation that's there. And there are a lot of things that I'm doing in the work that I do, both independently and with the organization that I'm working with now, that I have things that I did 6, 12 months ago. I now do much more efficiently because I've used tools to automate it. And the reason that I'm able to do that to a certain degree is because I've been working in this field for 20 plus years. Another example, I was speaking at a conference in London a couple of months ago, and I was invited while I was there to join someone for a podcast, like we're doing here now. But we were sitting together in person, and it was interesting because it was this third or fourth time that I was a guest on this particular podcast, and it was different this time because usually when I've done it at this event, there were four people in the room. There was the podcast host, there was someone who was manning the lights, there was someone who was manning this, there was something manning that, and this time it was just me and the host. And while he was setting up, I was talking, and he's like, "Yeah, I mean, the editing software does such a great job with all of this different stuff that it kind of automates a lot of it, and I can oversee this, and I can the lighting is all the so he used all these different tools to automate all this, and we wound up having a very interesting discussion where I was like, so what happened? The reason that you're able to do this is because you've been doing podcasts for 10 plus years. You've developed experience that you can give oversight to these automation tools that you're using and do those little tweaks. But what happens to the next generation of podcasters who don't have the opportunity to do the work that you did supporting someone else's podcast? How are they going to give oversight to these tools when they want to do it? And where is that apprentice level of work across the board exist so that we can give oversight and critical thinking to these AI tools? That's the piece that really I find myself very curious and concerned about. Is we've got about 10 years of super productivity where people who've been in this field for a while and have experience, and people who've been in any workplace in right, you've got 20 years of experience. I can give oversight to the AI, but if the next generation hasn't had that experience because AI is taking on their tools, taking on the work that they do to develop that experience, then where's the next generation of oversight for these AI tools going to come from? That to me is going to be really, really interesting to see evolve in the decade and so to come.
I love that because I've been thinking a bit about that. And my default position for a long time was if you're not having the opportunity to do the work yourself, how are you going to get to the point where you have the discernment and the critical thinking skills and the judgment to evaluate what's good and what's not good and how to tweak it to make it better? And then I thought, well, like it or not, that is disappearing. People will not go through the steps and develop
Mhm.
skills and experience and expertise the way that we did. And also, I'm just gonna credit myself with that because I've done it for 25 years. It actually doesn't mean because 'cause I've been doing something for 25 years, I'm particularly expert at it.
Sure.
But, um, but that's our model. That's kind of our apprentice model for developing to become a master. So if we don't have that, let's assume we don't have that, what are other options for developing expertise? And I think that's a really, really interesting thing to think about. How can maybe we simulate apprenticeships? Maybe we figure out a way to fast track that development of critical judgment in a really focused way so that it doesn't take you 25 years or me 25 years or however. Maybe you can get there in 5. Maybe you can get there in a different kind of a way. Maybe it's through but very structured, organized experiences that fast track you there that might not be in real world, that might be simulated, that might be in a different kind of environment. But we sort of throw somebody into incubator, pull them
Mhm.
out after a few years of developing their skills, and they've hit a level of mastery high enough, at least to be able to guide tools that have already been tweaked by people who had developed sort of feet on the ground expertise. I don't know, I've just been playing with ideas, but I just thought that has been the way we have developed to mastery today up to now.
Mhm.
Not an option anymore. It won't be. It just isn't. It's not gonna be an option in the future. So what are alternative ways to do that? What do you think of that?
Well, I'll start with agreement that it's going to be different. I mean, that there, and I think that there's a lot of resistance in the conversation around AI of just kind of like people trying to keep their turf and protect their jobs and things. And I understand that. But the train has left the station metaphorically and literally. I mean, the world is going to change. And to me, what you're touching on is what I've often described it as is there's a redefinition of things that we just think we have set definitions for. Give you a good example of what I mean. Like these, how we learn to do things is going to shift. And when I talk about how tech and any emerging technologies for that matter, anytime a technology emerges, if I want to understand how it's going to change the way that we learn, I don't necessarily look at education and training. That's how the tool changes how we educate and train people, which is a different statement than how the technology changes how people learn. And for me, if I want to understand how a technology is changing the way that we learn, don't look at how we train people. I look at how technology is changing the way that we live. Give you a good example of what I mean. Um, and I'll use generative AI as an example. Um, I and I'll share the story as quickly as I can. I write often in the work that I do. And I've worked with editors for probably 15, 20 years, of different types of editors for different publications that I've written for. And if there's one piece of consistent feedback I've gotten from every single editor, it's, oh my gosh, you got to make this shorter. I tend to write as a stream of consciousness, and it winds up being lengthy things. I've never been a concise writer. I've kind of always gotten it out, and if I'm honest, counted on the editor to be like, take this stuff out. This is ridiculous. Um, and one of the first play spaces I did with generative AI is I had a writing project that I was working on, and before I turned it over and let the editor do their thing, I took what I wrote, I put it into generative AI, and I said, "Make it 30% shorter." And it did it instantly. And I was like, "Wow!" It was like one of my first little. We've all had those aha moments with these tools where it seems technology has evolved to the point that it seems like magic, um, and and it did it. And I was like, "Wow, this is really great." But I didn't want to just turn that over. I think I didn't like. I think that's no. And so I was looking at it, and as I was looking to try and find out what it had changed, I said, "Well, let me ask you, what did you change and why?" And the why piece was kind of I stumbled upon it because it was just a natural thing. I didn't think of it, but it came back and it said, took out this paragraph because it didn't seem to be, took out these lines because it seemed repetitive, took out this part here, took out this paragraph completely because it didn't seem aligned to the point of the article. And I was curious. I was like, oh, wow, what's the point of the article? So now I'm having this conversation with this AI about the tools that it did, that the changes that it made, the edits that it made to my document. And it was really, really astounding to me. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And it wound up informing some of the edits that I made before I sent it out. So it was so useful and so insightful that I just started that just became part of my process for writing, where before I would send it over to someone, I'd put it in and I'd say, make it 30% shorter, and I'd find out what it did and I'd make some edits, and then I'd go in. So it kind of became my first step editor. But what I found really, really interesting, and this just happened through the use of these tools being embedded into the way I did work, was suddenly I realized I'm going to start with 20%. I'm not going to do 30%. I want to make it 20% shorter because I started discovering that my writing was becoming more concise. I would start with a guidance of give me a 1500 word count. And I'd write 2000. I'd be like, I got to make this 30% shorter. But then I was like, I was coming in more closer and closer to the target based on where my first draft was. And I was discovering that this tool, I didn't seek it out as an intentional coach. I didn't go through a formal learning experience. It was just the emergence of this tool as part of my process for writing became I learned how to be a more concise writer based on my experiences of incorporating this tool in it. It was nothing formal about it, but it just helped me learn through the emergence of this tool. Give you a simpler example of that is probably more universal to people. Um, Google. We all do searches all the time. I have noticed that my use of search engines, Google or whatever it happens to be, has changed in recent years. Because it used to be that if I was looking for something on the internet, I would type in topics, or that I would basically give a description of what I'm looking for so that it would bring up pages that would have hopefully the content that I was looking for. And suddenly I realized that now I'm Googling questions. I'm Googling specific questions that I want an answer for. Why did that happen? Because they now have this AI snippet at the beginning where it's giving me something where a lot of times it'll just come to the answer. And sometimes that's all I need. But other times I'll click into the resources that are linked to it to take a deeper dive. But it's changed the way that I use Google because it now has this AI snippet that's attached to it that gives you the answer. Now I'm asking questions and looking for answers. And that again is just hard. It's changing the way that I'm learning through my everyday interactions of how I use digital tools. So I think that those are good examples of how learning in and of itself is going to change by the introduction of these digital tools into our everyday lives.
So, I mean, I am by no means an early adopter. I am definitely one of the like, I just really I put up both hands. I was like, please, I'm not ready for these changes. And uh I accept I accept that everything is changing. I'm doing everything I can to now learn and sort of
Mhm.
immerse myself in these changes so that I can change and be more adaptable and also just more open to what is coming through work and also just through life. As you said, it permeates all the parts of our lives. One thing that does make me pause what you just said. So we used to put something into Google and get a whole bunch of responses,
Mhm.
not to a question, but just sort of something back, and you would hunt and peck around in that a bit. The fact that we now input a question and are getting to have the expectation of an answer,
Mhm.
the right answer, makes me nervous. That there's something about that that is, and in some cases, it's like there is a very specific question, and there actually is one correct answer in the sense that there's one answer I need to move forward,
Mhm.
and that makes sense in my context and what I need. But the idea that we're generally kind of funneling down and saying, I have a question, and that snippet is, eventually going to become the whole response. And so there's an answer. I'm giving you AI saying, here, I've got the
Yep.
answer for you. And that makes me nervous.
I completely agree. And I think it gets so using my example again, for me, it gets to a point of it's a redefinition of what it means to write. We're touching on that before. Like what does it mean to write something? For me, it's kind of the future is going to redefine what it means to write. The I had a discussion, and I'm going to come back to your exact point in a second, but I want to bring this piece in. I had a discussion at a college, and they asked me to come in and just do a session around AI for the students. And there were students and there were a bunch of teachers in the room. And I asked how people were using it. One of the students sarcastically said, "To cheat." Um, and and I kind of said jokingly, I said, "What do you mean by that?" And they said, "Well, to get the answers on the test." And I said, "Well, is that cheating?" And I saw all of the professors in the back kind of leaning forward, like, "Should we interrupt him? Should we interrupt him?" And it wound up having this fascinating discussion because I was talking about like they were talking about the essays and stuff, and I said, right now it feels like cheating. What if I was going to go in and say I'm going to use ChatGPT to help you write this essay? It feels like cheating. I said, but 5 years from now, it's not going to feel like cheating. It's going to feel like that's just the tool that people use to do that. And what does that mean for the way that we do it? Now, to your point of it feels like something's getting lost if we're just Googling the answer and finding the finite answer. And we don't learn through the searching and the critical thinking of all that. I totally agree with that. But the reality, as we said earlier, is this is the ecosystem that's emerging right now. So I think on one level, it's a redefinition of what our experience is and what writing means and what learning kind of looks like in practice. And I totally agree that if we are in an environment where I don't know something and I can ask the question and get the answer to that question and move on, all of that serendipitous learning of that I get through the exploration is lost in that equation, and that's bad. That's not a good thing. So how do we find ways around that? How do we find ways to reinforce the curiosity and things of that sort? These are questions that we're going to need to answer. One of the things in a very practical sense that I think is going to be important. And this kind of excites me a little bit. Like it's kind of like how do you take a problem and find an opportunity in the problem? Because I do think the risk of what's going on around critical thinking through the emergence of these tools is very real and something that we need to fix. But I always look at every situation like, all right, but what's the opportunity within this? There is a risk there, but what's the opportunity? And sometimes the opportunity can be the solution. So I'm going to put it into the context of workplace learning for a second. So I can go in and it's really not that different than what the environment is right now. I can ask a lot of people when they build a course or something, the way that we assess that someone knows what came out of the course is through an exam. and I'm going to ask you a multiple choice question, something like that. And just because you know the answer to that multiple choice question doesn't necessarily mean you know how to perform the task. But we now have the opportunity with some of these tools that are emerging to get closer to develop new ways to understand someone's competency around something. AI is going to be doing amazing things. So it's being built into a lot of the platforms we use every day as learning professionals already, to track what people are doing, to understand someone's competency around something, to get more into a skills based understanding of someone rather than just knowledge based or role based understanding of learning. And as the tools emerge to enable us to do that, that enables us to go past the multiple choice question, which has been valuable. And I don't mean to minimize that, but now new doors are opening to us. So now it's not just a matter of do you know the answer to this question, but can you apply the skill that's associated with this question? And I think that to a certain extent answers that question of if I can just go in and Google the answer instantly and move on, that's fine. And that might be helpful in the moment, but can you apply the skill? And where technology is emerging that gives us much better options than we've had in the past, in my career, at least this is a point, around being able to do that.
I'm having a Kirkpatrick moment. We're finally gonna get to like level 3, level
Hmm.
4 real life and also the analysis side. So really tying those two things together as far as, an AI agents or whatever's ability to go and filter through millions of pieces of data within an organization in terms of measuring current performance and then performance post
Hmm.
training or intervention or whatever it is, and really be able to tie those things together. I agree with I think that's wonderful. I think as I see as I'm taking a course right now, like this 4-week boot camp on AI and learning design, and so it's going by phase. So it's like analysis. I can see all the great benefits it's gonna bring in analysis. We're gonna get to evaluation, and I think based on what you just said, I could see that implementation. And the little piece that I'm trying to carve out for just keeping maybe of all those phases, the most human involvement is the design phase, which just happens to be my favorite phase
Hmm.
anyway. But it really is, for me, that's the heart of really trying to think about how to create an experience that's going to be meaningful for the learner and engage them and motivate them and get them excited. And what's the right combination? What are the real objectives in the combination, the affective objectives and cognitive objectives? And what are the right activities? And what's the right content? All the thinking that goes around that, anticipating that human being is going to go through this. And then for me, the other bookends, AI can almost own them. I don't mind, but I
Hmm.
sort of feel like I wanna hold on to, but I think that might be some of that's my, like, last my last hold, my last stand where I'm holding on to this, what I want to be still like, the most human intervention within the instructional design process.
Well, and I don't think that that's necessarily holding on. I mean, I think we all have a certain layer of that, but I do think that as these tools emerge, we're going to be constantly asking ourselves the question of, you know, what do I bring to the table that these tools? I mean, the reality is, if I'm an instructional designer today and an AI can replace the work that I do, then I make the argument that maybe it should, because you should be adding more than just content creation. You should be adding the human element that you do that. So what does that mean to me? What does that look like to me? I can have an AI create graphics and and the coding and the experience and all of the content that gets created there. It can do all of that, and it can follow any what a book says around instructional design methodologies to the letter and do all of that. It doesn't know what it feels like to be part of that experience. In my lifetime, I would argue it probably never will. And I won't say it never will, because I don't know what technology is going to do. I would not have thought 10 years ago that we're going to be where we are today. But I don't know what it's going to look like in the future. So I don't know if I'm not going to say never, but I'd argue probably not in my lifetime that we're going to see computers that understand what it truly means to feel something, the emotional state of it. And you touched on all of those human factors in there. What's motivating me? How am I feeling when I'm doing this? These are things that we still need a human to interpret. We need the human to come in and say, I need people to feel this, and this is what that's going to look like. But the AI is not going to do that for. And we need to understand the cultural implications. I mean, an AI is going to be able to develop a course really, really well. It is not going to understand that I, as the person who needs to take the course, am under tremendous pressure to hit my sales quotas. It is not going to understand the fact that my manager feels like anytime I'm doing anything other than being on the phone talking to clients is a waste of my time. It is not going to understand that that there's the pressure of layoffs in our organization right now. It doesn't understand any of that context of the environment and the ecosystem in which this content that it's created exists in. That's the human stuff that we need to bring on the table. So I'm thrilled at the fact that, I mean, I spent a good portion of my time staring at spreadsheets when I was leading departments in the organizations that I worked for. And I would be thrilled at the fact of like, let the computer do that so that I can focus more on working with the team on how we can better support things and and support the culture around how we grow in our organization. That's great. Let it do that because we're going to still need those human things in whatever the next evolution of instructional design and learning and development looks like.
So I kind of did that thing and redirected it on us as opposed to the people that we're trying to that we serve. But if we take that and flip it around, I'm sort of I think that all of these conversations might also help direct us back to focus on those things. So I don't think we've done a great job of taking people's emotional states into account during learning experiences in the past. And there wasn't anything stopping us from doing that. But we haven't necessarily done a good job, or at least not from a technology perspective. But maybe with this technology coming in, it gives us an opportunity to really say, okay, so what's left if we carve out the pieces that can be done maybe more efficiently or better by AI? What's left? And what's left is to really focus on the emotional experiences of the people going through the programs that we're designing.
Yeah, that's going to be a key element. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot that the humans are going to need to be still doing, and I think if we look at it through that lens of opportunity, I mean, that's the spreadsheet metaphor is the one that always worked well for me. I I can't find a learning professional that I've ever spoken to that was like, Don't you wish that you didn't have to massage that Excel sheet before you sent out the report that nobody looked at anyway?" And there's a pretty much a universal answer. Oh yeah, well, that's great. That's going to go away, but what are you going to do with that time? Like, what do you? I mean, that there's I, I hate the doomsaying conversation around AI, although I think we should all be mindful of the risks that could be attached to us contextually of the organizations that we work for. Um, and I don't think I'm not an absolute person on any side of the equation, either saying that it's going to take jobs or it's going to create jobs. I think it's all contextual to the environment that you're in. It's going to do both. Um, but one absolute that I will paint is if you have 5 people on your team today and I can automate 20% of the work, I don't need 5 people to do the same work. Like, that's just math. Math doesn't lie. If the work doesn't change and I automated 20% of it, well, I don't need 5 people to do that work. I need 4 people to do that work. That's just math. And that's not me saying I'm looking to make a team smaller. I'm just saying we need to be adding more value then. If you suddenly found 20% of free time, what are you going to do with it? And you have a tremendous opportunity to add value that we haven't been able to add before, whether it be because of time or other resources. We now have this opportunity that's emerging to do that. And we need to be harnessing it, not only to mitigate the risk of our organization saying, hey, we can save some costs because we're more efficient here, but because we have an opportunity to just add more value. I mean, that's one of the things that's most exciting to me is I feel like we have culturally and technologically been butting up against the same ceiling of how much value we can add to an organization, because I would love to tell my story of the value that we do, but gosh, all I can do in my reports is completions and test scores. Like, that's not really business value. And now that ceiling is getting raised by technology. Now we're going to have the ability for AI to connect the dots between what we do to someone's skills and the value that that skill has to an organization. Suddenly, we can have the ability to be much more strategic and informed in the strategies that we develop. That's an enormous opportunity for learning and development. And we need to be taking the time that's going to be made available to us by the automation that's coming to our world, and leveraging it to increase the value in that space that we've always struggled with.
I love that. I think that's great, and I think we could learn so much from what's working and also what's not working. Because
Mhm.
for somebody like me who's an external consultant, so I usually just kinda get parachuted in, I create some courses and workshops, I move on, I don't even see the implementation, let alone know what kind of impact it might have had on people
Mhm.
or the organization. But that kind of feedback for me is it's priceless to know, wait, what landed, what didn't land, what and then track back and say in this intervention, whatever it was, what parts of it were working for people and what parts weren't, and what resulted in changes in attitude, skills, behaviors, business results, organizational goals, and
Yeah,
what didn't. That's tremendous.
agreed. And that's
Um,
that's an exciting, if you look at it through that lens, you could just see it on your face as you were describing it. It's an exciting space to be in. We just have to be very intentional about looking at it through that lens. I guess the only other thing, and I try to give this message anytime I have a platform to do so, um, it's not an easy time to be in the L&D field. It's a stressful time. People feel that their work is threatened. Um, so what can we do about that? And I think part of we touched on is the human element, but part of it is being prepared. And what does that mean to me? Because everyone's workplace is contextual. Everything, like, there are organizations where they feel the pressure of AI because the organization is an early adopter and they want to do these. There are other people who are in organizations that are like, we're not even close to doing AI. This is not going to affect my life. It doesn't matter at all. And that could be I say AI, but it could be any emerging technology. That's all well and good. But again, I don't like absolutes, because what's right or wrong is not, there is no right or wrong that applies to the L&D industry. There is a right or wrong that applies to the context of what you need to do today. With one of the few absolutes I will allow is, th- you might be looking at AI and saying, it's not going to affect our work. It's not going to affect what we do here. I don't have to worry about that. And I agree with most of that, except for the last point, that you don't have to worry about that, because it may not necessarily affect the work that you want to do today, but it may affect the work that you want to do tomorrow. And most of us are probably not working in the last company that we're going to work for in our career, or the last client that we're going to work with if we're working independently. We should always be mindful of where the industry is going and thinking about what I want to do next and preparing for whatever that is. So if you want to go work for another company, check out the job descriptions of what another company looks for. Check out, if you want to go for another role in your career, look for job descriptions that are in that role. See what skills that they're asking for in that space, because you'll start seeing things around generative AI. You'll start seeing things about data informed strategies, and compare that to your current skill set, because you may be very happy with what you're doing today and think, I'm not looking for a change, but world can change, can flip on a dime very quickly. And you don't want to in that situation later on and discover that there are doors closed to you. You want as many doors open to you as possible, and having a little bit of a future focused lens on what are the skills you need to develop now, so that if, whether it's tomorrow or 10 years from now, I want to look for another scope of work, I'm prepared for that moment. So that's something that I recommend that everybody do. It's something I always recommend people do, but I think in the fast moving world of AI disruption, we should all be doing that very consciously.